just in case. All right, hello, welcome back, everybody. PayPal and Patreon are down below if you want to support me, and we'll do so if you actually can. And as always, if you want access to the graphs used in this video or hundreds of other kinds of all different graphs across all different kinds of subjects, a link to that Drive folder where they're all readily accessible is in the description. It's time for the monthly OPEC oil production levels update. Already did the non-OPEC countries at the beginning of the month like usual. Link to this month's update of those countries in the corner. So starting with OPEC's largest producer, obviously Saudi Arabia, who evidently was lying when they said upon ending the OPEC mandated cuts that they were actually going to continue cutting their production of their own volition. They were apparently lying when they said that, as they are, in fact, actually increasing their production, while constant year after year of keeping their production cut down has pushed the end of their plateau capability further forward into the future from about 2029 to 2032. Going back up to a plateau of 10 will not bring the end of plateau date back further towards the present, but will just cease pushing it further and further out, further down the road. So Saudi Arabia was holding consistently down, cut at 9 million barrels per day, but has actually started bringing themselves back up. And last time got up close to 9.2. This time has come up to 9.36 million barrels per day. Algeria, one of the only two other members in OPEC that was actually listening, as everybody else was either ignoring them or physically can't comply with them anyways because they're in some kind of strenuous situation. Algeria peaked in its oil production years ago and had declined down from 1.4 to close to 1 million barrels per day and is likely still capable of round 1 to as high as 1.1. We'll see how high they go back up to. This time they continued increasing back up from 900 over the past month, increasing from 920 up to 927,000 barrels per day. Iraq was one of the ones that was not ever really caring to obey the production cut orders. For the last few months, they have been stuck down just under 4, this time coming in at 3.94 million barrels per day. Iran lost the ability to hold their 6 million barrel per day plateau after the revolution happened. They were able to restore a 4 million barrel per day plateau and held that off and on for a few decades before the mega sanctions happened, which saw them drop down to only about 2 million barrels per day because they couldn't export anything, so they were only supplying their own domestic oil demand. However, as they started becoming able to actually export stuff again, they began bringing their production back up. However, they could not return back up to 4 million barrels per day as their fields are so matured and degraded at this point that they require massive amounts of natural gas reinjection to keep them pressurized enough to even maintain the 3.3 million barrels per day that they just managed to bring themselves up to. However, because of, certain events that occurred last month, June of 2025, their reported production output averaged closer to 3.2 at 3.24 million barrels per day. Kuwait, the one other member who was still obeying the orders that they got, and is still actually maintaining those numbers, even though the production cuts are over. They're still holding pretty flat, rated about 2.4, whereas otherwise, under normal conditions, they would prefer a plateau of about 3 million barrels per day. Nigeria once held around 2 million barrels per day, and technically they still could, but they would have to fix and repair and do a lot of enhanced recovery related stuff to revitalize a lot of their fields, as quite a number of things have degraded and decayed and been damaged by oil pipeline theft and terrorist attacks, and a lot of money that was supposed to be reinvested into oil and gas infrastructure was absconded in political corruption by the government. However, they have been recovering from the sort of floor or bottom out they had reached at one point, down closer of around 1.2 or 1.3. They're back up now to wobbling at about 1.5, this time coming in at 1.51 million barrels per day. Libya likely capable of somewhere between 2 and 3, and had been holding a bit above 1.5 for a while. until 2011, and then the off and on episodes of the Civil War. They have been reactivating and revitalizing prior fields and have managed to get their production back up from about 1.1 over the last 2 years up to now, usually close to 1.4, this time coming in at 1.37 million barrels per day. The UAE had typically held a 3 million barrel per day plateau, and they want to go up to a 4 million barrel per day plateau to get a bigger export margin again, as their domestic oil consumption is now over a million barrels per day themselves, and they were only down at 2.9 during the cuts when they were supposed to be down around 2.7 or 2.8. And even before the cuts ended, they jumped up to 3.3 or 3.2 for a little bit. They dropped back down briefly recently because of some offshore pipelines needing to be shut down while they work on the interconnection between some new units at one of their larger offshore fields. But that stuff is now coming back online. So now they've jumped back up over 3.05 million barrels per day. Venezuela, once at 3 million plus barrels per day, would easily hold that or higher for probably about a century or so, given the sheer extent of the Ornico Belt. However, when Venezuela collapsed in the later 2010s, it took its oil production down with it, all the way down to only 400,000 barrels per day, from which, in decent part due to intervention from Chevron, they have been able to gradually climb back up a bit above 1 million, and it looked like that was about to stall as current U.S. administration initially barred Chevron from continuing to assist Venezuela any further, then did a sudden 180 reversal on that decision and said that they could continue. So now that work is continuing, and Venezuela is up to 1.07 million barrels per day, and two small OPEC members, Gabon and the smaller of the two Congos, not the giant unstable one where all the cobalt is. Gabon has had different peaks and troughs and had recently declined down to about 180, but because of the addition of a decent new field offshore, they have come back up to around 230, this time coming in at 234,000 barrels per day. And the smaller of the two Congos is holding itself off around the mid 200s, once again coming in the 260s, this time at 263,000 barrels per day. All right, that's it for this one. Thank you everybody for sticking around and listening. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't already. PayPal and Patreon and the YouTube membership button thing are all down there if you want to support me. Only do so if you actually can. The link is in the description to the Drive folder with these graphs and all kinds of other graphs across all kinds of different stuff. No paywall, that's free to access, free to use anytime. So any support does help with the maintenance of that massive graphs and database. There's other links in the description to my photography Instagram and my Blue Sky, and one in the top pinned comment to my cat's YouTube channel. May God bless and protect all of you, and I will see you all around next time.